Hey everybody, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to the Outlier organizers. I'm incredibly thrilled to be able to connect with all of you from London, but I'm at the same time really gutted that I can't be there with all of you. I'm really sorry. What bad timing. Okay, let me just go get the door super quickly. Sorry.
You didn't expect a house tour, did you? Come on in. Well, welcome to East London, guys. This is my house. And while you're making yourself comfortable, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a creative director and data designer. I take data and I try to create ways to make it more accessible, more digestible, more compelling. I work across different formats and many different sectors, from theatre productions to digital tools, editorial commissions. The common denominator, though, is data complexity. And I'm also the co-author of these two books, The Infographic History of the World, which came out 10 years ago, and more recently, I collaborated with Britannica to create Britannica's Encyclopedia Infographica. And this is really the book that I want to share with all of you today, the behind the scenes, what I've learned, and the making. So yeah, come with me. Okay, so the first thing that you might wonder is, how did the book come about? Well, this was not my idea, it was a commission. Natalie, the senior editor, approached me because they were looking for a designer to join the team. Thank you, by the way, James, for the recommendation. Really appreciate it. Despite the fact that I swore 10 years ago that I would not do another infographic book because this book here almost burned me out, I said yes for 3 reasons. First of all, I love books, you can probably tell, and I really like children's book. And I always dreamt of illustrating a children's book. Well, encyclopedias and atlases is probably the reason why I became an information designer. I remember as a child I spent hours navigating maps and imagining a new world and different worlds. It was kind of like a way for me to escape my reality, and it really fostered this quest for knowledge that I keep having. The second reason is because I kind of learned over the years that whenever you recognize this gut feeling, the fear that the project is going to push you out of your comfort zone, is probably a good sign that the project or that opportunity is something not to be missed, because it's an opportunity for growth, and I felt that. And then third was really about the team. When I met Natalie, the editor, but also Chris, the publisher, and the 2 co-authors, Conrad and Andrew, I just knew they were so creatively invested, and their vision was so grand. They really wanted to reinvent the encyclopedia, to transform it into something much more relatable, much more enjoyable. Our collaboration was very effective because we had complementary skills, and along the way we assembled an extraordinary team of 6 expert consultants, 1 per each subject matter, 4 data researchers that helped us out collect the data, an in-house design team, design internship that assisted me, and a large team of fact checkers and editors, too many to name. I always loved the work of Maria Neurath, and looking back at these vintage infographic books for kids, I actually learned a lot by just how the layout was constructed, the step-by-step illustration to show the passing of time, or the side-by-side to show comparison, the use of color really in meaningful way to point out the hierarchy of the information and to make things pop. Those were all elements that I drew inspiration from. And also, of course, the work of Otto Neurath, Isotype, so the use of illustrations, and there are in fact 2 infographics that I created. There are direct tributes, if you want, to the work of Otto and Maria Neurath, the lifespan of the animals, as well as the costs of war. Another influence from the past is definitely Fritz Kahn, and again there is almost a tribute to his work with this cut-out illustration of the brain and all of the little people that are working to make the neurological activity possible. And as well as illustration from more present examples, and I've got so many that actually inspire the work, but I want to point out 3. This book here is a gem. is really fantastic because it makes information relatable with the clever use of scales and comparisons. These books here were amazing, especially this one, Earth and Water, depending on how you turn it. It really inspired me to push the illustration and the details of the illustration. And when it comes to illustration, I mean, the North Star would have been something like those books, the Welcome to the Museum series. Obviously, I didn't have the skill, not the time to get into this type of details for the illustration, but that was kind of like the North Star. And I will explain a bit later when I was actually going through the process of my own illustrations of how these elements have informed my work. All right, this is my creative box, my little studio where all of the magic happens. So how did I translate the mood boards, the references, the inspiration that I looked into boundaries for my book? And why am I calling them boundaries? I guess like I needed to have some sort of like guidelines to structure the content, but also to minimize the number of decisions that then I had to take on a daily basis in the production of every infographic. So I literally set up some sort of like guidelines in a template that define the grid and the layout, the typography style, the color palette, and the illustration style right at the beginning. Of course, these evolved, but there were some rules that I kind of like stick to. When it came to the grid, I wanted a modular system that was quite flexible because I knew that the content could actually vary quite a bit from one spread to another. We could have a hero content, a hero spread, without any supporting facts, or we could have maybe boxes around the hero content, or we could possibly have an infographic made of up to 3 different infographics that came together to narrate the story. Also, I work with a layout that could be both horizontal but also vertical, so you could move around the book and change the orientation to read the story in a different way. And the flexibility of expanding from 1 spread to 2 spreads where the content needed more space. When it came to the typography, this is where I really sweat. I mean, fonts are really not my thing, but I did know what I liked and what I disliked. And I wanted to go for something quite simplistic, quite minimal. I didn't want to go for a childish and over illustrative font. I wanted to, again, like kind of borrow this sophistication that some of the books that I looked into had. After lots of exploration, we settled for Filson, which is a playful geometric sans that allows us to actually create enough variation with the weight and the size to just use one typography, one font family across the entire book, both for headers, subheaders, copies, annotation. And I think actually it has a really nice kind of feel. It feels quite friendly and neat. And I also didn't attach any color to the typography. I wanted the type to be as legible as possible. So we have black copy on light background and white copy on dark background. That was the rule, to really provide maximum contrast. When it came to color, I knew I wanted to do something a bit different. And based on my mood boards and the reference that I looked at, I wanted to use color strategically to emphasize the focus and establish hierarchy. I wanted a color palette that was limited, opposite to the mainstream Encyclopedia. And to choose the swatches, I used a printed guide because it's really important to kind of see what the color actually looks in print. And I started to play around with complementary hues like the red and the blue or the green and the orange to create this color palette that could give me options to encode data in a quantitative way but also qualitative way to create categorical schemes but also sequential and diverging color palette. Because of the abstract nature though of chapter 1, the moment that I actually started to test this idea on space, everything kind of like broke, because in space, of course, all of the celestial bodies are defined by color. They're all circles, and you understand whether a circle represents the sun or Mars or planet Earth based on the color that you're giving. So obviously, 2 complementary color to opposite color weren't enough. I had to actually use a more extensive color palette. And finally, illustration. This was fun. This is where I really wanted to play and push myself, but also at the same time I had imposter syndrome kind of kicking in, because I always feel like I'm not really an illustrator because I don't have an established style. But anyway, I wanted the visualization not to look too vector and too soulless. I wanted to have some roughness to it, some hand-drawn feel. I wanted them to look friendly and warm. And that's the reason why I decided to then combine the work on the iPad with the digital work of the data visualization and the charting of Adobe Illustrator. I actually came across an app on the iPad called Fresco that allowed me to do a lot of hand-drawn illustration, but maintaining a vector output, which actually facilitated a lot of the production and the post-editing. And having learned my lesson in my first book, where I used hand-drawn illustration and then having to scan everything from paper to digital, and it was incredibly time-consuming, I needed to have a more efficient way of creating this hand-drawn illustration. Also, I added a bit of textures and pattern, and this was done in the post-coloring in Illustrator, where the dotted pattern was actually just added as a brush to color the shapes. Okay, so now let me summarize some of the key strategies that we implemented to really make data as relatable as possible to our young readers. First of all, context is king. And what I mean by that is that providing context through scales or forms and visual metaphors that kids can actually wrap their heads around is so important. We aimed to make data relatable by using one-to-one scale representations whenever possible. And to make large magnitudes understood, we presented comparable objects and familiar comparisons, like an asteroid as large as a country, or icebergs stretching the length of 8 whales, or a tsunami as high as a skyscraper, or the numbers of kids it would take to hug a tree. Visual metaphors were also used to provide context, to make not only numbers more relatable, but also complexity more accessible. A second strategy is simplicity. And this is a word that I really often disliked, because I always tend to define what we do when we are visualizing data as clarifying rather than simplifying. But working with young readers, with a young audience, actually simplification was key. Often, less was more. Our rules of thumb were: 1, let the image do the talk, and 2nd, we don't need to cover every aspect of a topic. The infographic should be a gateway, a window into a subject to further explore. So if we had too many facts and figures, we focused on the most interesting information. For example, we had lots of data about pollination, but we decided to finally just use one stat that we found was actually the most amusing. It takes 660 flowers to make a drop of honey. A third strategy is diversity. And diversity across many different aspects. Diversity in content, diversity in formats, diversity in color, to really keep the narration going. Diverse displays from infographics to illustrations, charts and timelines ensure uniqueness in each visualization. And we covered a broad spectrum of topics from space, earth, animals, humans and technology. Introducing photographic spreads provided a refreshing break from the dense graphics. Colors were used not only to give each chapter a unique look, but also to provide inclusivity. For example, people with an alien appearance, blue skin, do not suggest a specific ethnicity. And finally, global representation guided the selection process of the data points, ensuring a diverse range of origins whenever possible. A fourth strategy in creating engaging content for kids is humor. Humor is key in humanizing data-driven storytelling and avoid creating a boring textbook. We hope to put a smile on kids' faces with speech bubbles like, "I really need a haircut," and "Bye-bye Apple, see you in 24 hours," or the little dude looking up at the tallest tree. The more serious content is interrupted by light-hearted spreads, like how many cups of snot your body produces in a day, or the amusing fact that no matter the size, we takes the same 20-30 seconds across species. Finally, we ended each chapter with a scavenger hunt to engage kids and make learning more fun. And the final strategy for any content creation that actually applies to any audiences, really test what you're doing. Because you might think that your solution works, but for us it was really not until we asked the kids what was working that we truly understood whether it was working or not. And for us, May was our go-to tester. This was Andrew's daughter, a 10-year-old. There was our critic, but also our biggest fan. And at the end of the editing process, we ran a formal user testing with dozens of kids. The result was some brutal editing. Here you can see how we stripped back some of the complexity. Also, we originally wanted to include an appendix for each chapter to introduce kids to the history of infographics. After talking with kids, we decided to replace the historic infographics with simpler photographic spreads. Okay, so what was the process of actually creating the book and each individual infographic? First of all, what was the timeline? We had about a year. I was briefed in January, but soon I actually realized that my timeline was going to be much more compressed, 9 months. Why is that? Because actually I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I signed the contract. So my 12 months reduced into 9 months. Every month we would come up with a list of questions that we wanted to answer. And this is really the beginning of each project. It's just the research and kind of like coming up with a brainstorm. Then we needed to brief the data researchers to gather the information. And once the research was thoroughly fact-checked, we analyzed and organized the data into a coherent narrative. Andrew would usually draft a placeholder copy that I could use to start ideating the infographic. Next, we designed the skeleton of the infographic and the layout of each spread, choosing the most appropriate graphics and visuals to bring to life the information. Sometimes the starting point was a sketch, other times I would comp a collage of images that I will then send to Britannica for fact check before rendering them. Once we had a draft, we would come together to review and refine it before finalizing the design. The final step was to update all copy and one more time fact-checking the text, visuals and data to ensure that the information was accurate, engaging and visually appealing to the reader. Once all infographics were finalized in Adobe Illustrator, all artworks had to be imported in InDesign with editable text for translations. Thankfully, we had a brilliant team of designers who not only helped me to create the book in InDesign and the pain of converting units from the imperial system to the US system, but we also collaborated to design chapter openers, cover and front and end matters. Finally, I would like to reflect on the journey and the lesson learned personally. First, done is better than perfect. Actually getting to a level where you are okay with everything is better than being incredibly satisfied with just a few things. Working on such a large volume of outputs, on something new every day, and often multiple infographics at once, taught me that being able to move fast and fail fast is incredibly important. And while the realization that not every infographic needed to be a masterpiece allowed me to actually publish the book. And your perfectionism shouldn't be really the bottleneck. The second lesson learned is that you need to ask for help. It is especially important to watch out for your well-being when the workload is massive, deadlines are pressing, there are lots of people involved providing feedback, and in life you might also juggle some personal struggles, aka pregnancy and some serious family health issues we had to deal with. Learning to let go, knowing when to delegate was a crucial lesson for me, not just to avoid personal burnout, but also to empower others to step in and ensure the success of the book and trust other people. There is a quote that I would like to read you because it really resonated with me. We can only truly be in charge when we are willing to let others take charge. And then finally is choose your own battles. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It wasn't all like perfect in terms of collaboration or in terms of process. Learning to work with the constraints we have and pick the right battles to invest our energy wisely is as important as recognizing that others' opinions can enrich the outcome. I remember having heated conversations with the team of whether we should go with a more literal color palette. But I pushed back and I thought, actually the giraffe can be green and kids can still see that it's a giraffe. I want that, and it's actually been one of the most successful, I think, visual element of the book is the color palette that is very unique. But I also lost other battles. For example, I was not keen on the photographic spreads. And actually now when I see the kids reading the book, they absolutely love the photographic spread. Okay, time to conclude. So I'm so happy to actually hold this book despite all of the challenges, and it's been a thrill to see it out in the world. It's been amazing to see the Amazon reviews, very, very positive, reviews on the press, but also being recognized by awards. But more than I think, really the most rewarding thing is to hear from parents as well as educators. They actually got in touch directly to say how much they've enjoyed the book and how much they've seen the book as this connector with the young readers. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see more exploration of data-driven storytelling for kids, because I think there is a great opportunity to actually engage younger readers, to foster the critical thinking and also the creativity through data design. Thanks for listening, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Have fun in Chicago. Say ciao ciao. Ciao ciao. Bye.